If you work at a research site, you know clinical trial budgets are complicated. You can spend months negotiating and end up with a lot of buried and hard to manage invoiceables. It's important to use every tool available for you to capture those payments. We've found there's no better solution than Real-Time CTMS. Real-Time CTMS is a leading provider of innovative software solutions for clinical trial research sites, site networks, sponsors, and CROs. Real-time systems allow users to manage complex clinical research processes with powerful, user-friendly interfaces that are revolutionizing how research gets done. To get a free demo, visit the company's website at realtime-ctms.com and complete one of the contact forms. Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. Today on the show, we have Rob Bohacs. Rob is the founder and chief solutions officer at ClinOne. They work with world-class pharmaceutical companies to rethink and redevelop how clinical trials should be managed, with patient centricity at their core. Rob believes it's time to completely alter how we manage clinical research at the site and patient interaction by bringing trials directly to patients to simplify a very complex process through technology and automation. In this episode, we discuss site empowerment, the importance of measuring patient experience, and using decentralized trial methods to strengthen the site and patient relationship. Without further ado, Rob Bohacs. All right, Rob, I appreciate you coming on today, man.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I'm going to jump right in as usual and kind of like to hear people's backstories, how they got into clinical research. I think it's always fun and sometimes, informative for people who, don't otherwise know about clinical research. So go ahead and give us your backstory, man.
Yeah, of course. This was probably 100 years ago, it feels, to be quite honest with you. But I was working in the healthcare industry, and I ran into a company that was an oncology-focused CRO and site management organization. They needed some consulting work, and started working with them a couple of months and turned into a 6-month and longer-term engagement, and realized that, is this really possible? The challenge that really exists within clinical trials, is it really that far behind? And this was, a good 10 years ago. How is this humanly possible? So I eventually joined that organization full-time, grew through the ranks, took over as CEO and get that company sold. But, in terms of seeing the actual material issues within clinical trials and how pervasive it was, how unadvanced and how little technology was being deployed, was completely eye-opening. So that has certainly changed the course for me in being in a new career path. And that was 15 years ago. And in that parallel process, I've had family members who've been diagnosed and ultimately lost their lives to some pretty significant diseases. And it opened my eyes really from a patient's perspective. Navigating a clinical trial when you're managing a clinical trial from a CRO is difficult. It's complex. But if you take on the patient lens and the caregiver lens, all of a sudden that journey becomes extremely complicated, right? It's no wonder why patients don't want to consider participation. It's like rocket science to them. So passionately, I've built a company in the last 5 years on developing technologies that helps them identify what they have to do, how to simplify that journey, how to create the appropriate expectations, how do they manage their day-to-day workflow. And, I'll continue to invest the rest of my career on the same path until this is solved.
Yeah, and you hit on several good points there. I think even, I've been working at a site level for almost 15 years. It's blows my mind how inefficient and scattered the process is, even, for the site. And then you extend that on to the patient. When the site doesn't know what they're doing, it's very difficult to, keep the patients informed. And, to go back to your other point, we're still using fax machines and terrible tech that, is not doing these patients any favors. I tell my employees this, but I'm shocked when people agree to be in a clinical trial. And again, this is somebody who does it every day, and I love what I do. But what we ask from people is a pretty heavy lift, right? It's a lot of time and energy that we ask people to give us, and we don't provide them the tools to do that. What do you consider to still be some of the biggest hurdles, and especially the patient journey, but more generally the clinical trial process?
Yeah, every clinical trial is a custom, one-off, one design, not a lot of similarities to my next study that I'm trying to manage. I'm held acutely responsible for any mistake that I make in a completely customized foreign study. And the types of trials that I've personally managed, big portfolio, complex umbrella studies, 12 arms, 6, 7 amendments along the way. And then we hold these individuals at site really accountable for any mistake they make, which makes it very, very difficult because it's complete custom one-off trial. And I think the sponsors need to continue to invest in technology that supports that site as well. You have sites like MD Anderson that have endless technology purses in terms of investing in the tools of the site. But then you have like the normalized sites, the hospitals and private practices that simply don't have the same budget as those sponsors. They don't have that advantage. So we would like to see that sponsors, if they're going to put together a really comprehensive, unique study design, make sure they're supporting the site with as much technology as possible to make it easier, right? And drive consistency. It's a win-win scenario as well. And then a lot of the activities for managing that patient experience fall on to the site. I just finished a webinar this morning, in fact, that talked about like dosing compliance. Right? I wish the coordinator can call Jane, the patient, twice a day. Jane, good morning. Time to take your medication. Did you take it? Okay, I'm going to make note of it for you. Good evening, Jane. I'm going to call you again. What are you having for dinner? Oh, don't forget, you have to fast before you take this pill in the evenings. Small example there, but we just don't have that luxury and we don't have the human capital. And now with the shortages with research staff, we're seeing this be amplified. So we need to make sure that we put together a bridge between that relationship of the site and the patient, make it very easy to use Uber inside of our products. So I don't have to worry about calling a taxi or no, Jane doesn't have transportation. What am I going to do? Her appointment's in 45 minutes. Struggling to call a cab, you need to submit a $14 expense to the sponsor. In 4 months, you'll get reimbursed. There's just so much that we can do to empower that coordinator and make them superhuman. And at the same time, in the same equation, really empower that patient to use technology as well.
And I think there's, again, a lot to unpack in that brief stint you had there. So I agree 100%. I mean, I feel like this is overlooked, especially by a lot of the newer DCT platforms and companies that are coming, to market. Right now, as it stands, patients come through sites. Participants come through sites. So the experience the patient is having is, to a large degree, how well that site can provide, it's almost a customer service. I sometimes tell people that, clinical trials are too clinical, right? Like we're not always trained to think of it as sort of a customer service job. We're supposed to be very, objective. And unfortunately, that's not how it works. You're not going to get patients to, agree in the first place and then to keep coming back. They have to maybe take time off of work. They have to drive across town. They have to find childcare. So we really have to work on creating an environment that, people want to come to, both creating the environment and building the relationship. But, at the end of the day, if I'm handing them an e-diary that's a piece of trash and I can't troubleshoot it with them, that's a big problem. And I think you also point out something interesting in that site models affect that, I believe, too. So you've got large academic centers where, frankly, a lot of departments I've even worked in the past, they're not really run like a business, right? They've got extra people around. They can make phone calls all day long, as to where your private or standalone sites, maybe they can't do that. Like you said, you can't make 3 phone calls a day to remind somebody to take their medication.
Yeah.
For better or worse, these private sites are doing sometimes more of the enrolling because they're quicker and more efficient than large academic sites are. So that's really interesting to me. Absolutely. That I like the way you frame it, that being able to help sort of empower the coordinators to be able to do their jobs better. So that brings us to where you're at today with ClinOne. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah, of course. Happy to fill you in with ClinOne. I just want to certainly resonate with a statement you said, and that is these site staff are being pulled in so many directions. Everything from managing IP, managing their EDC entries, their open queries, monitoring visits. Those tend to be prioritized, right, in the scheme of a clinical trial. Very rarely are we looking at like patient satisfaction scores and surveys. Rarely are we. And I respect the clinical trial is there to collect clinical information so we can make those submissions. But ultimately, you have to think about that patient, because if you take oncology, for example, those patients are going into first-line therapy, maybe entering a clinical trial at second line, maybe in first-line therapy. We want them to come back, right? If they progress on their disease, we want to come back for that second clinical trial and the third clinical trial because their experience was so positive. It's just we've really prioritized that the coordinators and nurses and PIs are very much on managing the technical aspects of a clinical trial and less so the human aspect. And we have to start putting tools in place to measure the patient experience as well. And I could tell you those coordinators are really busy, right? And some patient may not get the same support as another site who's got less administrative burden, more time. So creating a unilateral industry approach to say, look, this is important to us. Yes, open queries are important to us, but let's measure how patients are doing in our trial and get that feedback. And if we need to make investments in the resources, great. So in terms of founding ClinOne, I realized that software and technology is going to play a big role into the lives of clinical trial patients. And then really seeing that hands-on in parallel with my own family's issues was eye-opening, right? I remember my dad, who passed away of ALS, received his first clinical trial opportunity from an institution, a very, very well-tiered institution in Southern California. This coordinator sent my dad the informed consent, no background, no review. Let's set up a phone call and talk through it, because this is a lot in a 25-page document in a mortal condition. And he's like, I'm not going to participate in this. It's going to kill me. How would I consider participation? So just sending somebody an informed consent document, just isn't going to work. So that really compelled me to build on to ClinOne in parallel that says, okay, anybody who's looking at a clinical trial should be supported by knowledge, information, education, transparency with that site, and go through things together. So I founded ClinOne in about 2016. So we're maybe just over 5 years old. We're a company that today we're about 50 FTEs, another 10 consultants operating in the US and across Europe, supporting trials globally. And I'm having an amazing time on a couple of factors, right? Building a company with the most amazing human beings I've ever met. So if you look at our leadership team, if you look at our company themselves, it took us a lot of work to build this team and to persuade them to join us and join this journey. And growing a business over 100% year over year in a decentralized setting has been very difficult, to be quite honest with you. But being down this path with a team that wants to accomplish the same goal for the benefit of the patients, and then, of course, beginning to see sponsors adopt technology, say, okay, I think we agree. And then the pandemic has forced us to adopt technology that we haven't seen before as well. So getting sites to use technology they're not familiar with, convincing them, having a one-on-one dialogue about what the gaps are, why are you not using it, and listening to that feedback along the way has been really interesting. It's an exciting journey. I think we have a lot of future developments as an organization and moving to supporting that patient. And I'm going to talk about kind of what I think maybe the future holds for the industry overall. But technology is going to play a bigger and bigger role so that we can take some of that work off the coordinators while enhancing the experience of the patients. So it's been exciting. Not a good day every day, but as a collective progress in 5 years, it's been pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to see, especially from the site side with the sort of rise of DCT. I mean, you can't. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I can't open it up without seeing somebody else writing an article about decentralized trials. It's very rarely from the site side. So I'm kind of curious, like, what your thoughts are in terms of how. Well, first of all, do you think DCT and the new technologies? Look, let me digress for a second, but it's no secret sites have to deal with a ridiculous amount of technology platforms, right?
Yeah.
Any one study I work may have 7 platforms to log into. They don't communicate to each other. Maybe one does to another, but and that's one project, right? And that may be you may be working 5 to 10 trials if you're a busy coordinator. So in sites, I think here about DCT, there's a little bit of anxiety there, right? Like, great, do we have another platform to deal with? And then to kind of speak to your other point, is there going to be some, depersonalization of the process with DCT as we're getting kind of more disconnected in some ways from our potential subjects? Do you see that, being addressed with sites? Do you think that's a valid fear? I mean, kind of what's your spin on that, I guess?
I do. My perspective on DTC is that there's a broad range of emotional and reaction to that. What I mean by that is there's some clinical trials that are ripe for DTC. Simple trials where the patient can manage their clinical trial experience remotely. They can potentially have a home healthcare nurse come out and provide some of the visits, some of the lab draws. Right? We're talking about pretty simple clinical trials. And on the very opposite spectrum, you have very sophisticated, complex indications, like buckets of cancer, ALS, any terminal disease, right? Where the patients absolutely cannot miss the site visits. One, there's a lot of lab work that's involved, there's imaging that's involved, and there's a human connection involved. Again, I'm learning a lot from my own journey. My mom has late stage breast cancer at the moment, and just managing that process where she enjoys going into the site, believe it or not, right? She has another person to talk to about her condition that they can listen, understand, and she very much respects their opinion. So moving that into a DTC model where she doesn't see other human beings or has a transactional, potentially transactional, I don't want to classify that in terms of an experience with somebody coming up, pulling the labs, and then that's it. They're a functional, responsible tool at the patient's home. I just don't see that. In these complex indications, my personal opinion around DTC has changed that patients go to the site. They build a connection and a bond with that coordinator and the PI because their lives are in their hands and they want somebody they can turn to and trust for that opinion. And that's what we work on. How do you improve that? So instead of just having a phone call with the PI, can you do a virtual visit? So my mom and myself can be on that call with the PI to talk about what's next, right? That's what I mean by enhancing the connection between the site and the patient, less about using DTC to break apart that relationship. And again, complex indications, gene therapy in the future, they're just not going to have patients receiving care at home. So again, simple diseases, absolutely. The more complex diseases that we tend to operate in as a company, we're not going to move to DTC. Can we reduce a visit so it's more convenient? Yes. Can we have better travel logistics through Uber and other travel partnerships? Absolutely. Can we provide a patient with a white glove approach for their care so there's somebody coordinating all their efforts? Absolutely. But let's not keep them at home and away from that site. They're there for several reasons. One is emotional, one is physical and clinical.
Yeah, and I think I love that answer. I don't think that's always the way it's perceived. I see a lot of again, DCT solutions kind of getting bandied around as being like the cure-all, and they're going to slap it into everything. So I love that. It's a very nuanced and thoughtful answer, which I very much appreciate, rather than sort of sunshine pumping, if you will, the whole method or technique. So I do like that. So I guess I'm curious to know a little bit more, even just about ClinOne specifically. Are you guys in any way engaged directly with sites, or does it tend to be a platform that's more driven from the sponsor or CRO down?
Yeah, great question. We've taken this very unique approach in the market because you've got technology companies that sell into sites, and then very differently, you have technology companies that sell into sponsors. I'll skip CROs just for simplicity of conversation here. I think one of the things we realized early on in the organization is that if you want good site adoption, you have to consider and commercialize your products to both, right? That means that sites can buy our products, sponsors can buy our products. Yes, sites and patients are the users of our products consistently, but we want to provide a technology that can be used by multiple organizations and types of organizations. And then we take our product and have integrations with their other technical solutions at the site. So we're not asking them to do more work. We're just simplifying that workflow for them in the technology as well.
Yeah. And again, I love that. I think sometimes a lot of these solutions are out of our hands as a site because, we spend so much time living in this sort of top-down world. Like, here's your 7 platforms. Good luck. Figure it out, So I love that there's some site engagement there. And it looks like there's some very useful modules and components within ClinOne. I'm curious to see how sites can continue to sort of, call the shots if they're like with their technology solutions as DCT, catches on more and technology is a little more well accepted. But again, I think you're right. All the technology in the world's cool, but if sites won't use it or can't use it effectively, then who cares, right? Like, if it doesn't make our lives easier, then what's the point?
What surprises me is that a lot of clinical trial technologies are not built to like consumer grade healthcare or even enterprise healthcare level product. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the industry, but I've seen a lot of products in the market where the usability, the functionality, the automation just isn't there from a user experience perspective. And we have improvements to do it because the company as well. Just for full transparency, we always want to make a better product. But we've designed it from like a consumer level product originally, meaning that's easy to use, it's intuitive. You don't have to log in 15 times to get to your 15 studies. It's in one place, it's organized, it's on your own device. It's not designed to provision tablets to patients and the sites. It just doesn't work that way anymore. So building into the ecosystem and then really improving and building on our API framework so it better synergizes with their existing technologies is a next big step for us as well. We have that in place today, but we want to turn that into like a plug and play solution so that we can blend in. I don't care what technology the sites are using. Bring in ClinOne. In 10 minutes, we connect it to this CTMS and this e-regulatory solution, and it simplifies that process for us because they're not software engineers. And then a lot of our software that we've designed and developed, we centrally program on behalf of the sponsor. So that means the sites are using the software instead of trying to figure out, how do I upload a document? Well, it's already been uploaded for you. It's been pre-configured with your amendment in your site. Don't worry about it. Like we're here to help you. We do support our technology from a service perspective, but we realize that the more time that coordinator or nurse or PI spending with the patient less on how to upload a new version of an ICF amendment, the better we are as a world. So we will always continue to support sites and sponsors with some of their work behind the scenes. We're good at it. We're the pros, right? We design our products, easy to use. We know how to upload a document. We'll do that for you, easy. So you can use the product for functionality versus having to configure it or program it or upload new documents.
Yeah, and I love that because I know the struggle is real at sites, right? Like, remote monitoring sounds great, but not if I have to upload into a terrible platform that I can't figure out. My coordinator can't figure out how to use, So I love that. If I can shift gears a little bit, I like to ask all of the guests, what are maybe some tools and resources you use throughout your day to sort of make your job easier or be the best Rob that you can be? It doesn't have to be anything clinical research related. Could be a book, podcast, software, technique. What's maybe something you'd share that really helps you?
Yeah, great question. I guess I'll just be as open as possible. I'm privileged that historically, when I was founding ClinOne in the beginning stages, I was really a part of a CEO technology group where you can have once a month, have a chance to sit down with peers, talk about some of the macro issues in building a business, and really being able to spend the day or two out of the office to work on the business. Whether you're a coordinator or a PI or a company executive, we spend so much time in the trenches that it's really healthy to pull away, be completely disconnected, and work on the macro issues. That has really personally helped me quite a bit. Number two is, I don't think I've always followed this trend in my career, but really since founding ClinOne, I've become more and more prolific in hiring the best we can get as a company, right? So if you look at our executive team and the organization which we built and recruited, just bringing in people who are much smarter than you to build a business has been amazing. And that's an adjustment for most individuals. It feels great to be, the least smartest one in the room. And I always want to be that individual. And then, of course, learning. In my journey today, I would say my career, my intellectual development, I'm probably 25% of where I want to be. So prolific learning is, sometimes painful, unintentional, you make mistakes and you learn from them, or proactively. But just being thirsty for knowledge. And the older I get, the more receptive I get to like this very proactive free time learning and how much I enjoy that to gain information. And then last is just, being around the challenge you're trying to solve, which is a little difficult in the pandemic. But before this, I spent a lot of times at sites talking to PIs, coordinators, nurses, occasionally engaging with patients as well, like what's really happening, to do a good job of listening. I think a lot of folks in the world just don't listen enough. And I'm sure my kids will tell you the same. I don't listen at all, but it's not the case. I tend to listen quite well. Just listen to what challenges exist. In fact, majority of the products we built at ClinOne is all because, wow, I didn't realize that was a challenge. What do you mean there's no effective e-consent product in the marketplace? Everybody says they have e-consent, for example. Just listening to the challenges overall. And the last is just your critical goal setting, both in your professional and personal life. People make fun of me, but I have specific personal goals that roll right into my company goals on a monthly and quarterly basis in my personal life. I know that sounds a little artificial, but it's extremely genuine. Like my personal growth and happiness is building a great company that has global impact to patients, seeing that impact materialize, but then making sure I'm always hitting my own growth potential as an individual. And it's hard. It's hard to challenge yourself. I think a lot of folks are tired when they get home at the end of the day. Maybe they're at home at the end of the day, right, with the pandemic. But making sure you press yourself forward and to do things better today than you did yesterday is an important element and trait that I'm still learning. I've got a long ways to go here.
Hey, none of us are ever done, right? I mean, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But yeah, I know I love some of the things you touched on there. You know, the cliche is that you're the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. So having people around you that are, smarter, better, more efficient is always going to serve you. It may not always be comfortable for you, but you're right, it's going to serve you. And I think it's I can say at a site level, it's especially important that the culture you build plays a huge difference in the success of your company. If you're people at your site don't get along and can't see eye to eye, or they're not putting it all out there, then you're going to crumble. I mean, it's going to affect the patient experience as we talked about earlier. So no, I love that. I think that's a kind of oftentimes undervalued thing, is to really surround yourself with people you can learn from, right? I mean, that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
And I think some of the indications we work in, once again, right? So if I look at oncology and visiting amazing cancer centers around the world, they have a really difficult job, right? A portion of their patients pass away every year. I imagine that'd be a very difficult job if some of the clients you work with literally pass away. That's hard. You see that prolifically. There's some amazing advancements we're making in drug development in oncology, right? Some of the CAR T-cell survival rates, some of the upcoming gene therapies, extremely exciting. But it's like you have to convince the patient that this is the right future, and that there's just so much knowledge sharing you need to do as that coordinator. If I were to suspect, like you have to become a evangelist of a clinical trial and have as much information downloaded to you, and you have to be inspired that cancer still sucks today, but it's making progress. There's some clinical trials that are coming out that are truly revolutionary. And today, when you hear the word "I'm diagnosed with some cancer," it's a really negative terminology, and it should be still. But there are 17,000 oncology clinical trials in the world today, in some form, whether they're registries or interventional, that are going to try to change that. And we have to shepherd and educate the patients to be in this world. I think it's hard, though, right? Because clinical trials are going to be limited to centers that can manage them. And then we have this huge void, which somebody needs to help overcome, but a huge void of private practices that can't afford or not willing to manage clinical trials. Like, somebody needs to bring clinical trials into that environment, in my opinion. That's how we solve it, right? Every cancer patient says, what's my option for a clinical trial? Helping drive education and awareness, and then giving the incredible feedback to the teams, the nurses and the coordinators who are on that front line. They're the frontline soldier for us, to drive awareness, education, excitement about research, and stop giving them, 7,000 administrative tasks every single month. Like, complimentary, take them to some of these amazing conferences, right? Let them hear some of the drug development activities we're seeing in the marketplace. Let them be inspired by research instead of just being drained by administrative perspective. Is something that I think we should do more often as a company and as an industry.
No, I think that's a beautiful point. I'm gonna let us end there. Rob, where can people find you online?
Yeah, of course. You can ping me on LinkedIn, Rob Bohacs, Bohacs, or at ClinOne. I'll give you my contact information here as well. And Brad, thank you for having me on today and being able to share some of my story and perspectives as well. And great job with this podcast.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate your time, man.
Thank you, Brad.
As always, thank you so much for listening. For episode transcripts and show notes, please check out our website at notetofilepodcast.com.